I'm Dina Wachtel with the Canadian Friends of Hebrew University, and together with my colleagues Ayala and David and the rest of our team, it is our pleasure to welcome you to this new five-part Sunday's webinar series titled In Conversation with Ambassador Ido Aharoni, featuring international friends of the Hebrew University. Ambassador Aharoni is a global distinguished professor at NYU and was Israel's longest serving consul general in New York. He is a 25-year veteran of Israel's foreign service, a public diplomacy specialist, the founder of Brand Israel program, and a well-known nation branding practitioner. Today's conversation is with Hebrew U alumnus, Mr. Christopher Ruddy, in which he will be discussing a super topical issue, US politics and the landscape of American media. If you would like to submit a question, please do so in the Q&A box or any other comment. And now, please welcome Ambassador Ido Aharoni.
Thank you so much, Dina. And it's such a pleasure to be with you again. Always a pleasure to be with the friends of the Hebrew University, especially when I'm given the opportunity to have a nice conversation with my long-standing friend, Christopher Ruddy, who's been my very dear friend for many years now. And I know that this has been a very, very difficult time in terms of the intensity of work. He runs a very large media company and still finds the time to spend 45 minutes with us, and we greatly appreciate that. You're all familiar with his face from national American media, frequently serving as a commentator on political issues, but not too many people know that Christopher Ruddy, in addition to being a very well-known conservative journalist who worked for the New York Post, the Pittsburgh paper, and many other outlets, has served as a White House correspondent. But he's also, in addition to the fact that he graduated from St. John's University and London School of Economics, he also spent significant time at the Hebrew University and became, through that time, a dear friend of the State of Israel, a dear friend of the Jewish people, and a dear friend of the university. So we welcome you, Christopher Ruddy. Thank you so much for taking the time. Are you in Florida?
I am in New York, actually, Ido, and I thank you for that introduction. And Dina, thank you. Ido, I've known you for a long time, and you've been a great supporter of Newsmax and a great, really, supporter of America. And it's very special. You were the longest serving consulate general to New York, which is a testament. Anybody that can be the longest serving anything in Israeli politics, it's such an important position. You got to be doing something right. So yeah. It's great to be your friend. And Hebrew University, I was only 18 when I attended the Rothberg School that summer. I studied under a great professor named Mordecai Nissan, who's retired now, and we're still friends, actually. And I became friends with Dov Friedlander, who was the head director of the Hebrew University. We did a program of bringing college students over to the Hebrew University for scholarships. And then when I did my dissertation at the London School of Economics, it was actually on bureaucracy and nation building using Israel as the best example of how that works. And I still have a copy of that I did, but the Hebrew University was kind enough to allow me to stay at their dorms and do research when I was there in my graduate years. So, and as you know, I've been to Israel many, many times. So I have very fond memories.
So I'm curious, and I'm sure our listeners are curious, as to what attracted you to Israel and the Hebrew University to begin with.
And as you know, I'm not Jewish, I'm Catholic, right? So I grew up on Long Island. My parents were very interested in politics. They listened to talk radio all the time. Came from a very middle-class background. My dad was a police lieutenant out in suburban in Long Island. And we would talk politics, Mideastern stuff. My mother was very sympathetic to Israel, and she felt they were being very mistreated. And so it was just a fascinating topic because it was a very controversial and this is like the late 70s, early 80s, as I was growing up. I saw an ad in the New York Times when I was in my first year at St. John's, a full-page ad to study in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University. And it talked about it being the center of the three great religions, monotheistic religions. And I remember looking at it and saying, you know what, I'm just going to go to Israel for the summer and hang out. And I was 19, at 18 or 19, and I did that. And I had a ball and enjoyed it. And then I've been back many, many times. So that was sort of my interest. And then when I got there, I fell in love with the place and still greatly admire and respect the Israelis.
And I must say, as someone who hosted you here a couple of years ago, you still have many, many friends in Israel. So you have a real network of people. And for our viewers to know, when Christopher Ruddy comes to Israel, everybody wants to see him. The Minister of Defense met with him, all the big shots in the Israeli government, and it had nothing to do with the fact that he had personal relationships with the President of the United States. But I think people appreciate his understanding of all the nuances of the American system. So before we jump into that, tell us a little bit about Newsmax, how you came up with the idea of establishing Newsmax, and where are we today with Newsmax?
Well, that could take a couple hours, but suffice it to say, I went into journalism after grad school. I taught in the inner city. Actually, I was a teacher in the South Bronx, a bilingual teacher. And then I fell accidentally into journalism, did some articles that got the attention of Rupert Murdoch and Eric Brindell at the New York Post. I was hired in my mid-20s to be an investigative reporter. I covered the Clinton White House. I became known as an antagonist of the Clintons and very critical of them as a reporter, and became famous in some circles for my reporting. Was hired by Richard Scaife in Pittsburgh, one of the Mellons, to continue that reporting. So that's the 90s. And I started Newsmax. I saw Matt Drudge. I knew about Drudge before he was famous. He would link to a lot of my news articles in Pittsburgh. And I thought, wow, this guy, before the internet, if you wrote for a newspaper in Pittsburgh, nobody read your article unless you mailed it to a copy or you faxed it to them, which is a very difficult process, right? So now when I was going around the country, I saw hundreds, thousands of people reading my articles. And this was very transformative because the gatekeepers in media, the AP, New York Times, Washington Post, TV networks, their control over information was gone. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I just start this internet? Now, I didn't have a lot of money, but I raised a couple $100,000 the first year, and then went on to raise about $15 million. Then we turned a profit in 2001, and our digital media company, Newsmax.com, became very successful and profitable. And then in recent years, as you know, I saw the power of internet. We were one of the first to start an online TV channel called Newsmax TV. And it became so popular, we decided to take it and become a cable news channel, a full-fledged cable. When I started that in 2015 area, people said, you're not going to get on the cable systems. We're now on every major cable system. We're in close to 70 million homes. And we're really, I think some of the recent ratings show becoming a major force in cable news. And my idea about journalism is that I'm conservative, but I really don't think I need to push a conservative agenda. I like to give people both sides. And as long as I give them both sides, I think people will make informed decisions, and that's good for everybody.
Yeah,
and I try to
Chris,
keep that.
I think we lost your video. If you can look at. Oh,
Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Yeah.
All right. So obviously, these are intense days for you, I'm sure, as someone who runs a media empire. Let's talk a little bit about the polarization in the American political system. I'm in Jerusalem. In Israel, we have an interesting political system where everybody wants to be in the center. The dream of every political party in Israel is to be considered centrist. What happened in American politics and how that influenced the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not sure I know all the answers to that. I would just say polarization. I think in the 90s, we saw a lot of these scandal stories. Justice Thomas, when he was up for nomination in the 90s, the Bill Clinton, Jennifer Flowers stories, Whitewater and all of that, Gary Hart. And then Bush brought in 9/11, I think, a period of normalcy. There was, even though there was differences over the war, there was a lot of bipartisan legislation. I think Bush was one of the more bipartisan, and he worked with both Republicans and Democrats. Obama comes along. I believe that the polarization politically really starts with Obama, and he wanted a health bill. He didn't include really any Republicans. I think Arlen Specter sat in a couple of meetings. They didn't reach out. Where Bush, when he would do any legislation, prescription drug, or I think he did 3 stimulus, it was always bipartisan. Obama didn't want to hear it. He had a set idea of what he wanted to do. He didn't want a health bill that had Republicans. So he pushed them out in the Senate, and they pushed it through. That was the beginning. And then he did a stimulus bill that was almost $1 trillion. The Republicans at the time would have done a stimulus for about 500 billion. Obama said, no, I want to do 800 or 900 billion. And too bad, he cut them out. That was the end. Basically, there was no major legislation. There was a couple of little odds and ends that came out in the next 3 or 4 years. And there were no new budgets. Everything was continuing resolution. And Obama didn't want to work with the Republicans. Boehner, for his part, didn't want to work. I thought he was terrible Speaker of the House. And so you ended up having lockjam. Trump came in, and I thought that he's comes from a background that's all Democratic, that he was going to try to work bipartisan. And I think his intent was to do that. But then he was attacked by people, and then he immediately went on the offensive. As you know, anytime you attack him, he's got to hit back, according to his philosophy. So there's really been no end to the polarization that began in 2008-9.
Yeah. So this is a very good overview of what happened in the last couple of decades. What do you think is going to happen next in terms of the process itself? So the major news networks announced Biden as the president-elect. I don't know if Newsmax did or not, but last time I checked, you didn't.
That's correct. Yeah.
So what's next?
Well, let's just peel this onion, okay? You know, the press is saying that, and everybody's saying we want to get along, we want to bring harmony. Joe Biden's going to bring harmony, but what do? We have an extremely close election. I mean, extremely close. I was just doing some numbers earlier. Nevada right now, it's a 3% vote difference. 30,000 votes separate the president and Joe Biden. In Arizona, it's less than 1%, 20,000 votes. Wisconsin's still in play, less than 1%, 20,000 votes. Pennsylvania is 40,000 votes, and it's 0.5% of the total vote cast. And Georgia's 10,000 vote difference, which is 0.25%. Usually in states, 5% is a trigger for a recount, and it's considered close. These are very close races. So the president said, with the extraordinary number of mail-in ballots, we've never had this, that's tested the system, where you have 3 million ballots come in the state of Pennsylvania, for example, alone by mail. And they're very prone to manipulation, to fraud, and other problems. Why don't we recount them and review them and test them? And everybody's saying, no, we got to immediately declare Joe Biden. And they're declaring Joe Biden. They have no legal authority to declare Joe Biden. They're projecting him the winner. And somehow that's the basis for his acceptance speech. I think the public should decide. It's only a matter of days and weeks for them to come to a certified process in all of the states I just mentioned. And then you don't look like you're stealing the election, which is, I'm not saying they are, but there's a certain set. Hillary Clinton, in August, gave an interview and she said, if this election is close, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances. Under any circumstances. I mean, they're pretty powerful stuff. So all Donald Trump is looking at is a very close election. I think he would concede if he gets his review. And I think the review, may declare Joe Biden. But my view at Newsmax is we should, in such a close election, under these circumstances with COVID, let the electoral certifications take place first. We don't need ABC and Fox News and others to declare the winner.
So you think that it's a matter of weeks actually until you get the certifications from each state, assuming there's no recount.
Also, the candidate, like if, let's say in Pennsylvania, there's still votes to be counted. They're always finding mysterious votes in Pennsylvania. But if you found out there was 150,000 vote plurality, the president may decide, hey, we're not going to overcome that, even in a recount and a review. I have a feeling that if you did a proper recount of those ballots in Pennsylvania, you would find of 3 million ballots cast or 2.5 million, whatever, probably 100,000 don't have a signature, don't have a postmark, are ineligible just on a very pure look of a defect found on that ballot. And that's problematic for Joe Biden. And I think Donald Trump, people around him are telling him, you have a pathway here. The problem the president has is he doesn't have the logistics. He doesn't have the lawyer set up. He doesn't have the smart people he needs to implement something. And that's a problem now so late in the game to organize that.
What would you say was the main obstacle for him in this election? A lot of people say it's because of COVID-19. Is it really the case in your view?
I think he had a lot of obstacles. The media didn't give him a chance. I mean, they've been pretty harsh. Fox News has not been particularly good, and Newsmax TV has been growing phenomenally in the past few weeks as people very angry with Fox about Chris Wallace moderating debate, Fox confirming a lot of negative stories about the president. And then on election night, we called Florida. We were the first network to call Florida. We did it after 90% of the ballots, and we confirmed with political experts he was going to win. And then for another hour and a half, Fox wouldn't call Florida, but they called Arizona within a half hour of the polls opening, and 14% of the vote counted, and they projected Joe Biden the winner. You have to ask yourself, why were they doing that? People were supposedly still waiting online out in Arizona to vote. There was a perception that night that Fox was, even Newsweek did a story that the audience of Fox was furious tuning into Newsmax. But getting back to your original question, there's so many issues. I think the coronavirus response has not been as effective as it should have been. So that hurt the president. The economic issues, senior voters defecting, just a myriad number of things. But if the exit polling data was very clear that when people were asked, even Biden supporters, who would be better in handling the economy, Donald Trump won by a big number, like 55%. That's usually the whole election right there, right? Remember Carville's famous line, "Is the economy stupid?" So, I think there were personal issues with the president. Some people don't like his approaches on things, his tweets. I don't like them all. I've known the man for 20 years. I don't agree with everything he does and says, but I do think his results have been pretty strong for a president.
And he was, you would admit, he was an outsider, right? He was a solid brand, a well-known global brand who transitioned into politics, but did not really accept the political traditions, right? He was a disruptor in many, many ways. And I'm thinking maybe the fact that he wasn't so presidential had something to do with it.
No question. No question, because a lot of people look at all these Republicans, so-called Republicans that were upset. Most of it was that they didn't like his behavior. They didn't think he was presidential. You know, if you tell Donald Trump this is the way it's always been done, you should think about doing it that way. It's like more reason for him not to do it. He just likes, you know, we get up every day and we have our challenges, whatever they are. For Donald Trump, he gets up in the morning and his big challenge is not to be bored. He's constantly trying not to be bored. It's actually a big issue in his personality. And so he likes to, on some ways, that makes him extremely appealing. I mean, think about this guy, for 15 years, he had the #1 TV show, a hit primetime show on a major network. Nobody has that in TV. I mean, it's very rare. So you have that. He was at the top of the finance world, and he was at the top of politics before he became president. I mean, he was a big, big guy. And so I always used to say to him before he was president, I said, Donald, you hit the Triple Crown. And he'd say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you're the only person I know that's at the very height of business, politics, and entertainment. And he hit it out of the park. So, and I think for him, he was the first citizen president. He came in. We've never had a guy who was not an elected politician or a general as president. And he wanted to be unconventional. He has been. He's gotten a lot of good results because of that, but he's made a lot of enemies too.
Now, if you had to give advice to Biden, what would be your main advice to him?
I think Biden's trying to do it already. I think it's part of his personality is to reach out and to truly reach out. A lot of times these guys will say, we want to reach out, but they never really do reach out to the other side. And Biden has had a history of working well with Republicans. I like Joe Biden. I've always said I've liked Joe Biden, even during all that impeachment stuff. I think he's a centrist. I think he's a good guy. I voted for Donald Trump because I think Donald Trump would make the better president, more consistent with the issues I care about, and has the performance results to prove my vote. I don't have a problem with Joe Biden per se, but I am concerned about his advanced age and the fact the Democratic platform's gone so far left. I mean, to me, it's off the charts in some of the things they're calling for. I hope Joe reflects on that.
Now, do you think Israel has any reason to be worried about that progressive left within the Democratic Party?
Oh, yeah, on so many levels. Wow. Biden is more traditional, pro-Israel, I think, but he also is very close with the Obama people who were very sympathetic. I wouldn't say they're pro-Iran, but they're very sympathetic. They're going to bring back the JCPOA agreement right away. That's coming. That is not good for Israel, I think. Iran is an existential threat if it gets nuclear warheads with Israel. I don't think much of a question of that. And the Democratic Party is moving to embrace more of an Islamic approach to the Middle East. I mean, we have millions of Muslims now in the United States, and we're seeing, if you're pro-Israel in the Democratic Party, I mean, Black Lives Matter openly in their website said that Israel was an apartheid racist state and that the United States should oppose it. And as you know, that's sort of a mainstream now in the Democratic Party in many ways. So I think the Jews and the Israelis are not going to get off great with the new Democratic Party that's emerging.
All right. I think at this point, I'd like to get our audience involved. We have Dina, who's screening the questions for us. So I'd like to start with a question that's coming from my dear friend Mike Granoff, who is an American Israeli investor and entrepreneur. He's asking, are you suggesting that the elections is closer in 2020 than in 2016? Are the margins in the swing states not larger this time? That's a question from Mike Granoff.
Well, I haven't compared it, but it looks like they're pretty, like Pennsylvania was 40,000, but again, I haven't looked apples to apples on all the percentages. But here's the difference, Mike, is that a lot of these margins were created by mail-in ballots. We've never had a percentage of the electorate, 30 to 50%, do the mail-in ballots, which are much more questionable. When you go into a machine polling place and you vote, it's very hard to dispute that. But if you mail in a ballot and you don't follow all the procedures, it's disputable. You can also have post office employees intercept ballots from certain areas. You can have people try to copy postal ballots or harvest the copies, go around the community asking people to fill it out. There's all sorts of things, licit or illicit. And that's why I think these margins are problematic for Biden where they weren't for Trump.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. We have a fascinating question from my dear friend Boaz Gaon, who's an Israeli entrepreneur, former journalist like yourself, a former playwright. Actually, he can't be a former playwright, a playwright. And a very dear friend of mine. We both served in New York together. Boaz would like to know if he said an argument can be made that the fear that Trump instilled in Republican circles, ironically, led to his defeat since there was no one there to correct his self-destructive nature. Did Trump bring about his own downfall in that respect? And I would add to that the fact that he announced before the elections that he already knows that there are going to be irregularities probably drew unnecessary, as far as he's concerned, attention to the process itself. And then again, self-defeating act.
Well, I wouldn't go and jump to the conclusion he had a downfall. He's still president, and it was pretty close. Most polls had him at 10%, 8, 10%. I mean, that's another story. The media malpractice, the polling weighting was so off. Then you have to ask yourself, was it intentional? It was so poor and bad, and somebody needs to there must be some accountability for that. I think, the way I look at it is people's greatest strength is often their greatest weakness. So Trump is an innovator, an entrepreneur, disruptor. Those type of guys and gals don't like to necessarily hear from other people. They see a path, they absorb information the way they like to absorb it, not necessarily a normal consultative process, and then they implement it. And look at how far Trump got in almost all his career paths in life. So for him, it worked. He even got the presidency doing that, ignoring the experts and everything else. I mean, think about the 2016 election. He hardly had any money. So, but now we're all seeing the weakness to that. You don't have the people, you don't have the logistics now when you've got a legal fight and you didn't prepare, you don't have the preparations for it. And I think people, frankly, have been scared away. A lot of great talent around the president that could have gone in the administration, could have gone into his campaign, because he sort of does it his way. So again, I just see it, it's his approach. I wouldn't necessarily say it leads to his downfall, but it does create problems.
Yeah, and I would like to clarify, I see through the questions that some people, I think, somewhat misunderstood what you said. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that what you said is that it's not that Newsmax has evidence that that there are irregularities in the ballots. Is that all you're saying is, let's wait until all the states certify the official outcomes, right?
Yeah, there's supposed to be, and every state's different. We have, for the Israelis over there, we actually have 50 elections, not one. That's a big part of our problem here, is that every system's different rules. And so, for example, in Pennsylvania, the law states that you're allowed to observe the ballots, the mail-in ballots, and their counting. And the way some counties interpreted that means you have to stand 20 feet away, 30 feet away. as they open the ballot. And the Republicans are saying, wait a minute, traditionally that means I look at the ballot, and they were denied access. So a judge could rule, hey, you didn't follow the proper procedure. All those ballots should be tossed. They could have been manipulated somehow. So this is why they'll say there's no evidence, but they're not allowing the Republicans to look at the ballots to find evidence, which the system allows in its monitoring process. I don't necessarily see that there was widespread voter fraud. I think the system was vulnerable to it, and I think they should be allowed to review the ballots.
Now, if Biden would like, as I'm sure he will, to reach over the other side of the aisle, who would you say are his prime potential partners on the conservative side? And should he, like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and I believe George W. Bush, appoint someone from the other side to a senior cabinet position?
Well, I think that's always a good thing. If you put a couple of Republicans in, show you're reaching out, that's always a really good sign. It demonstrates good faith. I don't think conservatives want to, quote unquote, partner with Joe Biden. It's not our nature and our system to do that. But what I think Biden should do is find issues where he can get common ground with Republicans and work with them on doing stuff where say, okay, we don't agree on all these different things like climate change or whatever, but here's 10 things we actually do agree on. Let's just get that legislation done. I always ask my congressman and senator friends, like, why don't you just go through the checklist of common agreed, like the Venn diagram? And they'll always say, it sounds so reasonable, so logical, but it'll never happen in Washington. And I'm like, why? Anywhere else, you would just agree, if you're in business, what are the things we can move forward first and quickly? And people said it could be as simple as, well, if we got that done, it would help, Senator Smith in California in the reelection. We don't really want to help them, even though we agree with him. That's why nothing ever gets done. A lot of things don't get done.
Right. And again, it's interesting to see how the American political system actually lives perfectly fine with the fact that the American system has the Electoral College mediating the outcomes, and it's not really one person, one vote like in Israel. In Israel, we have the entire state of Israel is just one electoral district, if you may, and one person, one vote. And what is the reason Americans are not bothered by it? That at least for an outsider like myself, it doesn't seem it's a big issue that there's no one person, one vote.
Well, deeply rooted in our national psyche is the idea we were all these independent states, and that the federal government, there's a lot of fear of federal power. We like power segmented, fragmented in the US. And so this is a sort of check on the system, and it forces every state then to be a player, allows that because they have electoral votes. And it's the same reason like senators are really not proportionate, right, to the population. Delaware's a tiny state, it still gets 2 senators. Is that fair? California is such a bigger state. But the founding fathers in their genius, I think, realized it's good to have these imbalances because they check authoritarian power. And I think there's a lot of people that fear it. So I personally think it's problematic with the Electoral College now because a president then isn't popularly elected. They don't have as strong a mandate. It creates a problem from them for day one. As a Republican, I sort of like it because I think it's protective and it allows Republicans to be, because it's going to be difficult for Republicans to win the popular vote in years ahead. In fact, I think they only won once in the past 20 years. That was in 2004, and only by not many votes did they win the popular vote. So it's demographically tough, but it is better for the country if the president is popularly elected.
Right. And do you see that Trump's election as something that is not in line with the demographics of the United States. A lot of people say the coalition of minorities is getting stronger. More and more Americans are moving to major urban centers. You have 40 million African Americans, you have the 55 million Latinos, you have 6 or 7 million Jews and Asians, about 11 million, and obviously the gay community is overlapping. Also, 6 or 7 million people that are actively participating in the gay community and its activities and so on. So a lot of people claim that this is the direction, and the fact that Trump was elected is some sort of an historical accident. Do you see that as well?
I think the first time was a bit of a quirk, yeah, on a lot of levels. So that was done with the Electoral College. He lost by 3 million votes, 2% of the vote. The last election's very interesting, though. He was breaking a lot of those demographic barriers. So we know in the exit polls, he got about 12% of the African American vote. And the last time he only got 9. So that's a big increase for him. It wasn't as big as they thought it would be. And then he got 34% of the Hispanics, which is up from 29. Not as good as Bush did, which he got 44%. That's the biggest area for Republicans to gain votes, is with Latino voters. Gay voters, interestingly enough, Trump got 35% of the vote among them. Where he really lost out was more of a cultural thing, suburban women, suburbs. He didn't do well in. So that's where he really got crushed. And seniors, he carried by much bigger margins, and that was down. But considering all of these things going on, he did better this time than he did last time in terms of popular vote count.
Yeah. So Randy Milner is reminding us that we wanted also to discuss the landscape of American media. And she's right. Apologies, Randy. We were so carried away by the political discussion. So Randy would like to know, how do you see the future of American media? What's going to happen with this infamous echo chamber and the algorithm that is pitting us against each other? Um, where do you see that going?
I guess that's like a whole nother subject, but it's so huge. I mean, I'm part of the media, but we're a small part of it. But I think that there's a lot of danger and warning signs we see in the election. I think I'm really disturbed. Twitter is like censoring a lot of tweets the president does, banned a lot of New York Post whole Twitter account was closed because it did a report about Hunter Biden's supposed laptop. I think that, I'm not sure it was verified, his laptop, but I think the allegations were serious enough to ask for Biden's comments on it, a denial that they were his emails, that type of thing. So I see Facebook was banning different people. It was very authoritarian. Even though there's all of these media, there's really very few gatekeepers. Again, Facebook is huge, Twitter, and then outside of that, you have a couple of other the major New York Times, and the echo chamber is more on the left than it is the right. There is a right echo chamber, but it's not as powerful as the left echo chamber for sure. I spoke to the president by phone this week after the election. I think the biggest lament he had was over Fox News, and that they had been a very strong ally of his, and there was a lot of evidence they had not been. I think he was pretty stunned by the fact that they called Arizona so quickly and they wouldn't call other states. And he thought that he had, that they were more fair than other networks. And I think it was disappointing. That's why I think Newsmax is important, that we do have more media balance. And admittedly, we have that Fox audience. We appeal to that heartland audience. And our numbers are growing like crazy. We did 3 million viewers on election night. We had an OTT audience, probably about the same number. So we were drawing overall about 1 million viewers a minute to our channel, which is huge for a relatively new channel. And I think it shows that there's a marketplace for more diverse media.
Where do you see Fox News 10 years from now?
I think they'll still be a player, but I think they may not be as conservative. I think Rupert was a genius, is a genius. He built that whole empire, had very strong conservative principles. I'm not sure any of the kids share completely his set of principles and worldview. And I think if you look, Maureen Dowd had a comment in the New York Times, when Rupert passes, God forbid, his family will be run by a trust, and most of the family members in that trust probably are Democratic or lean liberal. So I can't see them wanting to embrace Fox News and Sean Hannity like Rupert Murdoch was or has. Meanwhile, the country needs to have more. I mean, CNN and MSNBC are, I thought they lost most of their objectivity. If you look at some of their reports, it's MSNBC seemed like a political organization.
Which leads me to the last question, because we promised you that we will let you go after 45 minutes and you have another very important interview to do. Do you think Donald Trump is going back to media? Trump TV, a lot has been discussed about his plans for the future.
Well, Donald Trump is media. It's been his whole life. Like, he loves it, right? So I think it's now the question as to how he does it. I think if he wanted to start a TV channel, it's very difficult. The cable operators would make it very difficult for him to get a channel. Then the question is, can he buy a channel? I think that's very difficult to do. There's obstacles to that as well. If I were him, I would just advise him to do what he's always done, which is just be out there in all the media platforms he can get on. And there'll be problems, but he'll still be a major political force. I would love for him to be on Newsmax TV more often when he's leaves the presidency. We're certainly never going to turn him away, and I think he's a voice and will remain a voice. But I'm not sure that the media likes to say he's going to start Trump TV or whatever. I'm not sure that's so clearly the case.
Christopher Ruddy, thank you so much for this candid conversation. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your openness, for your willingness to discuss the most important things to you in your work with us, with the Friends of the Hebrew University. You have a great day, the rest of the weekend, and we hope to see you soon in person.
I thank you. I hope to be over to Har Sofim soon and back on the old campus, and appreciate your time and your good work in supporting strong relations between our countries.
Thank you so much, my dear friend. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ido.
And back to you, Dina.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you again, Ido, for leading this interesting conversation. Also thank Chris Ruddy for making the time to join during this actually extremely hectic times for him. Most importantly, you, our audience, join us again next Sunday when we have a conversation with Professor Gil Troy about international affairs and the North American Jewry. Toda rabah. Thank you all. Have a good rest of the day.